Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, this will be a part 4 of the book that I have been reading through by Prince Felix Yusupov. Full title is Rasputin, His Malignant Influence and His Assassination. So if you're just catching on right now or catching up to 4, there's 3 other episodes you can go check out. The last show I left off at chapter 9, How He Decided to Act. It's pretty evident that in his personal dealings, he was Christian in name only. And some people say he's a fallen Orthodox priest and all this stuff. He doesn't seem to have a real quality grasp on the Gospels and biblical quotes. But obviously, I mean, if you're orgying and day drinking and engaged in all this behavior, possibly drugging the emperor, and hypnotism or magnetism, whatever they called it at the turn of the century. Those are all very unchristian. So people are, oh, he's just a fallen Orthodox priest. No. If you look at the picture that I put in today, he's clearly initiated. He's making the sign of initiation. You can see Crowley make that sign, all these other people, Savile. They're telling you, so those are Masonic hand signs that Rasputin knows. Those are not Christian. So, a lot of these people just they have very superficial understanding of historical events, and they make these conclusions based on very limited information or what somebody told them or what they watched on TV, which is a huge tell. Like, you're never going to get into details or really kind of finer grain understanding of things from the television. It's really a fallen media, in my opinion. Okay, so chapter 9, How We Decided to Act by Felix Yusupov. It'll probably be a 6-part series. My meetings with Rasputin and all that I had seen and heard had firmly convinced me that he was at the root of all the evil and the primary cause of all the misfortunes which had befallen Russia. Rasputin's death would put an end to that diabolical power which held the emperor and empress in its toils. It seemed as if fate had led me to this man, that I might see with my own eyes the part he played and the goal towards which his unbounded influence was urging us all. What then was the use of waiting? Was it possible to spare Rasputin, who was driving Russia and the dynasty to their doom, and by his treachery was swelling the list of casualties in the war? Was there even one honest man who did not sincerely wish for his death? Was there no shadow of doubt? Everyone desired the death of the criminal starets, and the sooner the better. So the question was no longer, should Rasputin be killed, but could I undertake this responsibility? It was necessary to take decisive measures. This abominable play of friendship could not be kept up any longer. Our original plan of shooting him in his own flat now seemed impracticable, in view of the extreme tension throughout the country. The war was at its height, the army was preparing an offensive, and the open assassination of Rasputin might be interpreted as a demonstration against the Tsar and his family. It was not a propitious moment for open measures. It seemed to me necessary that Rasputin should vanish in such a way that no one should know how or whether he had gone. It was most important that those responsible for his disappearance should remain unknown. I felt that Purishkevich and Maklakov, who fully realized the evil influence of Rasputin, would be able to give me good advice. Their public denunciations of him in the Duma were still fresh in my memory. Men who had exposed Rasputin with such vehemence could not fail to share my views and approve of my intentions. I believed that they would help me. I approached Maklakov first. I made an appointment with him and went to his flat. Our conversation was very brief. I explained my plan to him in very few words and asked him his opinion. Maklakov avoided giving me a clear answer. His hesitation and mistrust could be felt in the question which he put to me. "And why have you come to me in particular? I heard your speech in the Duma," I replied. It was clear that he inwardly approved of my plan, and I was at a loss to understand the reason for his evasive attitude. Was it due to lack of confidence in me as a man whom he knew only by name, or was it simply his fear of being involved in a dangerous enterprise? Whatever might be the explanation, a short talk with him sufficed to convince me that his assistance was not worth counting on. I realized that he was too cautious to venture on decisive action. However bitterly he might feel against Rasputin, his apprehensiveness would always gain the upper hand. On my return home, I telephoned to Purishkevich and arranged to go see him on the following morning. My interview with Purishkevich was of a very different kind. I had hardly begun to speak of Rasputin and my intention to do away with him when he exclaimed with characteristic vivacity and fervor, "Why, that has long been a dream of my own. I am ready with all my heart to help you, if you want me, but it isn't easy as you think. You can't get at Rasputin without slipping through a whole crowd of officials and spies who surround him." "All that has already been arranged," I answered. I explained to him how I had got into touch with the Starettes and told him of our conversations. Purishkevich listened with great interest. I mentioned the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich and Captain Sukhotin and told him of my conversation with Maklikov. Purishkevich fully shared my opinion that Rasputin must be put away secretly. While fully realizing the difficulties of carrying out our plan, he did not for a moment doubt its necessity or its immense political significance. He was firmly convinced that the root of the evil lay in Rasputin, and that only by his removal could the country be saved from inevitable collapse. Purishkevich was not in the least surprised by Maklikov's excessive caution. He said he would take an early opportunity of talking things over with him, and that he would try to win him to our side. Having assured myself of Purishkevich's cooperation, I took my leave. We arranged that on the following evening he should visit me at the Moika to work out a general plan of action. By 5 p.m. the next day, the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich, Purishkevich, and Captain Sukhotin had duly assembled at my house. After lengthy discussion, we came to the following conclusion. Rasputin must be done away with by means of poison, this being the method which would leave fewest traces of his assassination. My friends fully agreed that his destruction should bear the character of a sudden disappearance and that it should be kept a close secret. Our house on the Moika was chosen as the place where our project was to be carried out. A suite of rooms there was being adapted for my own use and would serve our purpose better than anything else. My associations with Rasputin would afford me an opportunity of persuading him to come and visit me. This decision caused me much heart-searching. The prospect of inviting a man to my house with the intention of killing him horrified me. Whoever the man might be, even Rasputin, the incarnation of crime and vice, I could not contemplate without a shudder the part which I should be called upon to play, that of a host encompassing the death of his guest. My friends fully understood my feelings. After much discussion, however, we arrived at the conclusion that where the destiny of all Russia was concerned, all considerations or feelings of a personal nature should be set aside. Our decisions were final, but one or two complications arose. The house alterations to which I have referred could not be completed before the middle of December. Both the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich and Purishkevich were due to leave for the front before then, although they would be returning to St. Petersburg by the time the rooms were ready. In this respect, everything fitted in quite well, but for over 2 months I had to face the repugnant task of keeping up my relations with Rasputin. It had been difficult enough hitherto to associate with a man whose destruction I considered essential, but the prospect of continuing to associate with him now that we had passed definite sentence upon him was still more painful. Purishkevich proposed a fifth accomplice, a Dr. Lazovert, who served in his detachment. We agreed. Our second meeting took place in the Red Cross train commanded by Purishkevich. Here we discussed and arranged all the details of our joint action, and definitely adopted the following plan. I was to continue to visit Rasputin, losing no opportunity of strengthening his confidence in me, and someday I was to invite him to my house, in such conditions that his visit would be kept an absolute secret. On the day that Rasputin should choose to come to me, I was to call for him towards midnight and drive him to the Moika in an open car with Dr. Lazovert as chauffeur. While Rasputin was drinking tea, I was to administer a solution of cyanide of potassium, which would cause his immediate death. His body was to be put into a sack, driven out of town, and thrown into the water. A closed car would be required for this purpose, and the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich suggested that we should make use of his. This was particularly expedient, for the Grand Duke's flag attached to the bonnet of the car would safeguard us from every suspicion and delay. While Rasputin was in my house, I was to be alone with him. The others should be waiting in an adjoining room, so that they could come to my help in case of necessity. Whatever might be the outcome of our project, we agreed to deny at all costs our complicity in the murder of Rasputin or in an attempt on his life. The place where Rasputin's body was finally to be disposed of was to be selected after the return of Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and Purishkevich to St. Petersburg. They both left for the front a few days afterwards. Captain Sukhotin and I met almost daily after their departure. Before he left St. Petersburg, Purishkevich had asked me to do my utmost to obtain Maklakov's close cooperation in our plans, and I accordingly went to see him again. I was agreeably surprised to find a change in his attitude. Instead of giving me evasive answers, he expressed his full approval of everything we had planned. But when I suggested that he should join us, he replied that towards the middle of December he would probably have to go to Moscow for a few days on very urgent business. I interpreted this to mean that while expressing his full sympathy with us in words, he wished to avoid all action which might implicate him in our plot. All the same, I gave him a detailed description of our plans. He listened with the greatest attention, agreeing with all our arguments and concurring in our proposed line of action. But he showed no desire to render any active assistance. He said goodbye to me with great kindness and wished us complete success. Incidentally, he made me a present of a loaded stick. "Take this," he said with a smile, "in case you might ever want it." Chapter 10. Rasputin accepts my invitation. In the meantime, I was completing my course at the Corps des Pages, and Colonel Vogel continued to coach me. I went to see Rasputin now and then in order to keep up relations with him. The repulsion with which he inspired me increased with the necessity of visiting him and talking to him. One of these visits took place a few days before the return of the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and Purishkevich to St. Petersburg. Rasputin was in very good humor. "Why are you in such good spirits?" I asked him. "Well, I've brought off a very nice little deal. We shan't have to wait long now. Our turn's coming." "What's it all about?" I asked. "What's it all about? What's it all about?" he repeated, trying to mimic me. "You're afraid of me, and you've stopped coming to see me. I've got lots of interesting things to tell you, but I won't just because you're afraid of me. You're afraid of everything. If you weren't, I'd tell you." I explained to him that I'd been preparing for my examinations at the Corps des Pages, and that the sole reason why I had not been to see him was that I had not had a moment to spare. He merely repeated, I know. You're afraid of me. Your parents won't let you come. Your mother's hand in glove with Lisbeth. They both of them think of nothing else but how to get me away. But they won't manage that. No attention will be paid to them. They like me at Tsarskoye, and the more I'm spoken against, the more they love me. So that's that. "But Grigory Efimovich," I said, "you behave quite differently at Tsarskoye Selo. While you're there, you only talk about God, and that's why they have faith in you." "And why shouldn't I speak to them of God, my dear? They are God-fearing people, and they like such talk. They understand and forgive everything, and they appreciate me. And as to people saying bad things about me, it's all a waste of breath. They won't be believed. I've often said to them, people will revile me, but remember how Christ was persecuted. He also suffered for truth's sake. And so they hear what everybody's got to say, but they act for themselves as their conscience bids them. With him, though, it's sometimes difficult. As soon as he gets any distance away from home, he begins to listen to evil-minded people. I've had a worrying time with him lately. We've had enough bloodshed, I tell him. Russians, Germans, Frenchmen, we're all brethren. And this war is God's punishment for our sins. But that's as far as we get. He's obstinate. All he does is repeat it would be shameful to sign peace. Where's the shame if you're saving your brethren? Millions of people will be killed, I tell you. Now she is a good and wise ruler. As for him, what does he understand? It's not his line. He's a child of God. That's what he is. The one thing I'm afraid of, continued Rasputin, is that Nikolai Nikolaevich may stop it all if he finds out. All he wants is to go on fighting, sending people to their death to no purpose. But he's a long way off now, and his arms are short. He can't reach us. That's why he was sent all that way, so that he shouldn't meddle and get into difficulties. But I think that was a great mistake, I said, to remove the Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich. All Russia worshipped him. That's just why he was sent off. He got too uppish and aimed too high. The Empress at once realized the way the wind was blowing. That's not true, Grigory Efimovich. The Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich is not all that kind of man. He had no ulterior motives. He was just doing his duty towards Russia and the Tsar. Since he went away, everything has gone from bad to worse. It was a mistake to deprive the army of their beloved leader at such a critical time. Now, don't you be too clever. If it was done, it means it had to be done, and that it was the right thing to do. Rasputin rose to his feet and began to pace thoughtfully up and down the room, muttering to himself. Suddenly, he stood still. He came quickly towards me and brusquely seized me by the arm. There was a strange light in his eyes. "Come to the gypsies with me," he said. "If you come, I'll tell you everything down to the last detail." I agreed, but at that moment the telephone bell rang. Rasputin was then and there summoned to Tsarskoe Selo. I took advantage of this interruption to suggest that he should come and spend the evening at my home in a few days' time. He had long shown a desire to make the acquaintance of my wife, and thinking that she was in St. Petersburg and that my parents were still in the Crimea, he said he would come with pleasure. As a matter of fact, my wife had not yet arrived in St. Petersburg. She was still in the Crimea with my parents. But I thought that Rasputin would more readily accept my invitation if he were unaware of this. I then took my leave of him. The Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich and Purishkevich returned from the front a few days afterwards. We had several discussions, at one of which it was decided that Rasputin should be invited to our house on the Moika on December 16th. I telephoned him and asked him if he would come on the evening of that day. He agreed on condition I should go and fetch him myself, and that I should drive him back. Further, he asked me to approach his flat by the back staircase, promising that he would warn the dvornik, that's a house watchman, that a friend would be calling for him at 12 o'clock that night. He took these precautions with the object of leaving the house unnoticed. It surprised and appalled me to think how readily he agreed to everything. It seemed as if he himself were helping us in our difficult task. The appointed day drew near. I asked the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich to select a place on the Neva where it would be possible to dispose of Rasputin's body. He came back to me that evening, having spent several hours in the search. We sat and talked for a long time. He spoke to me of his recent visit to GHQ. He was very depressed at finding the emperor so thin and aged, so apathetic and indifferent to all that was happening. His words brought back to my mind all that I had heard from Rasputin. It seemed as if Russia were about to be engulfed in an abyss. We felt convinced of the justice of our decision to destroy the man who had so multiplied all the sufferings of our unhappy country. Chapter 11. The Cellars at number 94, Moika. On the morning of the 16th, New Style 29th, of December, during an interval in my work, I drove to our house on the Moika in order to give final instructions. The room in which Rasputin was to be received that evening was situated in the basement of the house and had just been redecorated. It had to be arranged in such a way as to give the impression of being habitually used. Otherwise, Rasputin's suspicions might be aroused, for it would seem strange to him to be conducted into a cheerless and uncomfortable vault. On my arrival, I found the upholsterers there, laying carpets and putting up curtains. There were no signs of furniture as yet, and I went to the storeroom to select what was suitable. The newly decorated room had originally formed part of the wine cellar. In the daytime, it was a rather dark and gloomy chamber, with a granite floor, walls faced with gray stone, and a low vaulted ceiling. Two small, narrow windows, level with the ground, looked on to the Moika. A low arch divided the room in two parts, one of which was rather narrow, while the other was wide and spacious, and was intended for use as a dining room. From the narrower part, the entrance door opened towards a spiral staircase. On the first landing of this staircase, there was a door opening into the courtyard, while a little higher up was my study. Anyone entering these rooms, therefore, would first come into the narrower portion. Here, in the shallow recesses, were two big Chinese vases of red porcelain, which stood out in striking relief against the somber gray walls. I ordered some antique furniture to be brought down from the storeroom, and we began to arrange the dining room. I can still picture the whole scene down to the smallest detail. There were carved chairs upholstered in mellowed leather, small ebony cupboards full of secret recesses and drawers, massive oak chairs with high backs, and here and there little tables covered with colored fabrics, bearing ivory goblets and Italian objet d'art. I have a particularly vivid recollection of an inlaid cupboard, the interior of which was a labyrinth of mirrors and little bronze columns. On this cupboard stood the 17th crucifix of rock crystal and silver of Italian workmanship. In the dining room, there was a large open fireplace of red granite. Over it were a number of gilt cups and old majolica plates and a group carved in ebony. The floor was spread with a large Persian carpet. In front of the labyrinth cupboard and crucifix was a huge white bearskin. In the middle of the room, we placed the table at which Grigory Rasputin was to drink his last. In arranging the room, I was assisted by our house steward and by my servant. I ordered them to prepare by 11 o'clock that evening a meal for 6 persons. They were to get a good supply of biscuits and cakes and wine from the cellar. I explained to them that I was expecting visitors and that as soon as they had prepared tea, they were to withdraw to the service room until I should send for them. When all these arrangements had been completed, I went up to my study where Colonel Fogel was already awaiting me. I worked with him until 6 o'clock and then went to my temporary quarters at the Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich's palace. After a hurried meal there, I returned to my home at Moika 94. It's page 147. Chapter 12. The last visit to Gorokovaya Street. By 11 o'clock, everything was ready. The samovar stood on the table with various cakes and sweetmeats, for which Rasputin had a great liking. On one of the sideboards was a tray with wines and glasses. I was still alone in the house as I cast an eye over the room and its arrangements. Antique lanterns with panes of varied colors lit the room from above. The heavy dark red curtains were drawn. In the open fireplace, a huge fire was burning. The logs crackled and threw out sparks on the stone earth. The room was almost underground and was ordinarily of a rather gloomy aspect, but now, thanks to the lighting and furnishings, it was astonishingly cozy. Moreover, the stillness which reigned lent an air of mystery, a sort of detachment from the world. It seemed that whatever might happen here would be hidden from mortal eyes and buried forever in the silence of these stone walls. A bell rang. It told me of the arrival of the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich and the rest of my associates. I went to meet them. They looked confident and in good spirits, but they all talked rather loudly and seemed unnaturally gay, as if their nerves were on edge. We passed into the dining room. The arrangement of it greatly impressed my friends, particularly the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich, who had seen it the day before when nothing was as yet ready. They all stood in silence for a while as they examined the scene of the approaching event. I drew from the labyrinth cupboard a box containing poison and took from the table a plate of cakes. There were 6, 3 with chocolate and 3 with almond icing. Dr. Lazavert put on rubber gloves and took out the crystals of cyanide of potassium. He crushed them, and having removed the upper layers from the chocolate cake, sprinkled each of them with a strong dose of poison, afterwards replacing the tops. We followed his movements with strained attention. A tense silence reigned in the room. All that now remained to be done was to shake some powdered crystals into the wine glasses. We decided to do this at the last possible moment, so that the poison might not lose strength by evaporation. The total amount of poison applied was enormous. The doctor assured us that the dose was many times stronger than would be required to cause death. To make everything appear natural, it was necessary that there should be a number of used cups on the table, as though people had just taken tea. I had explained to Rasputin that when we had visitors, tea was served in the lower dining room, and that after the others had gone upstairs, I sometimes remained below reading. We slightly disarranged the table in the room, drawing back the chairs and pouring a little tea into the cups. I further arranged with the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich, Sukhotin, and Purishkevich that within 10 minutes of my departure, they should go upstairs to my study and turn on the gramophone, selecting the most cheerful records they could find. My object was to keep Rasputin in good humor and to clear his mind of all suspicion, for I could not entirely rid myself of the fear that the underground situation of the rooms might put him on his guard. When all these preparations had been completed, Dr. Lazavert and I left the room. He changed into chauffeur's clothes and went to start the car, which was standing at the side entrance of the courtyard, while I put on a voluminous fur cloak and a fur cap with earpieces, which served to conceal my face. We got into the car and drove off. My head was a whirl of thoughts. I was sustained by my hopes for the future. During those few short minutes of my last drive to Rasputin's, I lived through a whole life of emotions. The car stopped outside number 64, Gorokhovaya Street. On entering the courtyard, I was at once challenged by the dvornik. "Whom do you want?" On learning that I wanted to see Grigory Efimovich, he was unwilling to let me pass and insisted I should give my name and explain why I was calling at so late an hour. I replied that Grigory Efimovich himself had asked me to come at this particular hour and go back to him by the back staircase. The dvornik looked over me with distrust, but nevertheless allowed me to pass. The staircase was in darkness, and I had to feel my way. I had not even any matches with me. With great difficulty, I at last succeeded in finding the entrance to Rasputin's flat. I rang, and in reply heard his voice from behind the closed door. "Who's there?" I shuddered. "Grigory Efimovich, it is I. I have come to fetch you," I answered. I heard him moving and bustling about. The door was chained and bolted, and I felt uneasy as the chain clanged and the heavy bolt grated at his touch. He led the way, and I went into the kitchen. It was in darkness, and I felt that someone was watching me from the adjoining room. Instinctively, I turned up my collar and pulled down my cap. "Why are you muffling yourself up like that for?" "What are you muffling yourself up like that for?" asked Rasputin. "Why, didn't we decide that no one should know about tonight?" I replied. True. I haven't told anybody here, and I've sent off all the tainiki." That's the secret police. "Come on, I'll get ready." He went into his bedroom, which was partially lit by a lamp in the corner in front of the icons. Rasputin applied a match to a candle. I noticed that the bed was disarranged. He had evidently just been resting. His fur coat and beaver hat were in readiness. On the floor was a pair of snow boots. He was dressed in a white silk blouse embroidered with cornflowers and girded with a thick raspberry-colored cord with large tassels, wide trousers of black velvet, and long boots brand new. Even his hair and beard were carefully combed and smoothed. As he drew nearer to me, I felt a strong smell of cheap soap. He had obviously paid special attention to his toilet that day. Certainly I had never seen him so clean and tidy. "Well, Grigory Efimovich, isn't it time we were off? It's already near 1 o'clock. Shall we go to the gypsies? What do you say?" he asked. "I don't know. Perhaps," I answered. "But there won't be anybody special at your place tonight," he said with a note of uneasiness in his voice. I calmed him by telling him that he would meet no one whom he disliked, and that my mother was still in the Crimea. "I don't like her, your mother, and she can't stand me, I know. She's a friend of Lisbeth. They're both digging pits for me and slandering me. The Empress herself has told me time and time again that they're my worst enemies. And what do you think?" he added unexpectedly. "Protopopov drove round here this evening and made me promise I'd stay at home during the next few days. They want to kill you," he said. "Evil-minded people are plotting against you. Ah, well, let them plot. They won't succeed. They haven't got a long enough reach. But what's the use of talking about it? Let's go." I picked up his coat from a chest and helped him into it. "Money, I've forgotten my money," he said in a fluster. He went to the chest and opened it. I moved nearer, and looking into it, I saw a number of parcels wrapped in a newspaper. "Surely that isn't all money?" I asked. "Of course it is. Nothing but banknotes. I got them today," he answered without hesitation. "Who gave them to you?" "Various kind of people. I just fixed up a little affair, and out of gratitude they made a donation to the church." "I suppose that there's a good deal of money there." "Why should I bother to count it? I haven't time. I'm not a banker. That's a job for Mitka Rubinstein. He got pots of money. Besides, to tell you the truth, I can't count it. I just said to him, 'Bring 50,000, otherwise I shan't worry over you.' Well, then they sent it. Perhaps they've given more. How should I know? It'll make a nice little wedding present for my daughter," he continued. "She's going to be married soon to an officer with 4 St. George's crosses. He earned 'em too. And there's a fat little job waiting for him. She has promised to give her blessing." "But Grigory Efimovich, didn't you say that this money was a donation to the church?" "Well, what about that? There's nothing to be surprised at. Marriage is of God, isn't it? The Lord himself gave his blessing at Cana in Galilee. And as to the particular use to which this money is put, Isn't it all the same to him, to God? Replied Rasputin with a cunning leer. I could not help being amused at the naive insolence with which Rasputin played with the words of the Holy Scriptures. He took some money from the chest, which he then carefully locked. He blew out the candle, and the room was again in semi-darkness, illuminated only by the lamp, which burned fitfully before the icon in the corner. I was suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling of infinite pity for this man. I felt disgusted and ashamed at the thought of the vile means and appalling deception with I was luring him to my home. Here was my victim standing before me, suspecting nothing, trusting me. At that moment, I was filled with the deepest contempt for myself. I asked myself how I could have decided to commit such a hideous crime, and I could not understand how it had happened. He trusted me, but what had become of his insight? What had happened to his instinct? It seems as if fate had somehow clouded his reason and blinded him to our intentions. But then I saw with amazing clearness one scene after another from the life of Rasputin. All my qualms of conscience, all my remorse vanished and gave place to a steadfast determination to complete the task which we had undertaken. I hesitated no longer. We walked towards the dark landing, and Rasputin closed the door behind him. The lock grated noisily, and a harsh, ominous echo rang down the deserted staircase. We were in total darkness. I felt a vice-like grip on my arm. "I'll show you the way," said Rasputin as he led me down. His grasp hurt me. I wanted to protest and shake it off, but I felt numb. I do not remember anything that he said to me or whether I replied. At that moment, there was only one thing I desired: to get in the open air as soon as possible, to see as much light as possible, and to not feel the touch of that terrible hand. As soon as we got downstairs, my horror left me, and I again became cool and collected. We got into the car and drove off. I looked through the rear window to find out whether we were followed. Not a soul was to be seen in the darkness. We proceeded by a circuitous route, and on reaching the Moika, we turned into the courtyard and drew up by the side entrance. Chapter 13. The night of the 16th of December. On entering the house, I heard my friends' voices and the sounds of a popular American song on the gramophone. Rasputin stopped to listen. "What's this going on, a party?" "No, my wife has friends with her. They will go away soon. So for the time being, let's go down to the dining room and have some tea." We went downstairs. Rasputin removed his fur coat and proceeded to scrutinize the room and furniture. He was particularly interested in the labyrinth cupboard. He showed quite a childish delight in it and returned to it again and again, opening and shutting the small doors and examining the interior. He refused at first to take either tea or wine. Does he suspect anything, I wondered, but I there and then decided that in any case he should not leave the house alive. We sat down at the table and talked. We discussed mutual friends, the G's and Viru Bova, and we touched upon Tsarsko Selo. "Grigory Efimovich, why did Protopopov come to you? Is he in constant fear of a plot against you?" I asked. "Yes, I'm a stumbling block to a good many people because I'm always telling the truth. Your aristocrats don't like the idea of a common muzhik wandering about the palaces. It's all sheer envy and malice. But why should I be afraid of them? They can't do any harm to me. I'm proof against evil designs. They've had more than one try, but the Lord laid their plans bare. Take Kvostov. He tried it on, but he was punished and dismissed. They daren't even touch me. They'd only get into trouble." His words sounded ominous. But nothing could now dismay me. During the whole of that conversation, I had only one idea in my head: to make him drink wine out of those poisoned glasses and to eat the poisoned cakes. He exhausted his ordinary topics for a time and asked for some tea. I poured him out a cup and pushed a plate of biscuits toward him. Why I offered him the biscuits, which were not poison, I cannot explain. It was only some time afterwards that I took the plate of poisoned cakes and passed them to him. He declined them at first. "I don't want them, they're too sweet," he said. However, he soon took one, then a second. Without moving a muscle, I watched him take them and eat them, one after another. The cyanide should have taken immediate effect, but to my utter amazement, he continued to converse with me as if he were none the worse for them. I then suggested he should sample our Crimean wines. Again he refused. Time passed. I began to get impatient. I poured out 2 glasses, one for him, the other for myself. I placed his glass in front of him and began to drink out of my own, thinking he would follow my example. Well, let me try it, said Rasputin, stretching out his hand for the wine. He was not poisoned. When I first gave him the wine in an unpoisoned glass, why I first gave him the wine in an unpoisoned glass, I'm also at a loss to explain. He drank it with obvious pleasure, praised it, and asked if we had much of it. On hearing that we had a whole cellar full, he showed great astonishment. He became animated. Now give me some Madeira, he said. I got up to take another glass, but he protested. Pour it into this one. But that's impossible, Grigory Efimovitch. You can't mix red wine with Madeira. Never mind, pour it into this, I tell you. I had to give way. By an apparent accident, however, I soon managed to knock his glass to the floor where it smashed. I took advantage of this to pour wine into one of the glasses containing cyanide of potassium. Having once begun to drink, he made no further protest. I stood in front of him and followed each movement he made, expecting every moment to be his last. But he drank slowly, taking small sips at a time, just as if he had been a connoisseur. His face did not change, but from time to time, he put his hand to his throat as if he found a slight difficulty in swallowing. He got up and moved about the room, and when I asked him whether anything was the matter, "Oh, nothing much," he said, "just an irritation of the throat." There was a nerve-wracking pause. "That's very good Madeira. Give me some more," said Rasputin, holding out his glass. The poison still had no effect. The starets continued to walk about the room. I took no notice of the glass which he held out to me, but seized another poisoned one from the tray. I poured wine into it and passed it to him. He drained it, and still the poison had no effect. There remained the third and last glass. In despair, I began to drink myself, hoping to induce him to drink more and more. We sat opposite each other in silence. He looked at me with a cunning smile and I seemed to hear him say, "You see, it doesn't matter how you try, you can't do me any harm." But all of a sudden his expression changed into one of fiendish hatred. Never before had he inspired me with such horror. I felt an indescribable loathing for him and was ready to throw myself upon him and throttle him. I felt that he knew why I had brought him there and what I intended to do to him. A mute and deadly conflict seemed to be taking place between us. I was aghast. Another moment and I should have gone under. I felt that confronted by those satanic eyes, I was beginning to lose my self-control. A strange feeling of numbness took possession of me. My head reeled. I saw nothing. I do not know how long this lasted. Rasputin was still sitting in the same position. His head was bent and he was supporting it with his hands. I could not see his eyes. I regained my presence of mind and offered him some tea. "Yes, give me a cup. I'm terribly thirsty," he said in a weak voice. He raised his head. His eyes were dim, and he seemed to be avoiding my glance. While I was pouring out tea, he got up and paced the room. His eyes fell upon the guitar, which happened to have been left in the room. "Play something," he begged. "Play something cheerful. I love the way you sing." It was difficult to comply at such a moment, and he was asking me to sing something cheerful. "I'm not in the mood," I said as I took the guitar. He sat and listened attentively at first, but as I continued, his head drooped towards the table. The moment I stopped, he opened his eyes and looked at me with a calm and sad expression in them. "Sing another," he said. I sang again. My voice sounded strange in my ears. Time passed. The hands of the clock pointed to 2:30. This nightmare had lasted over 2 hours. What will happen if my nerves don't hold out, I wondered. Upstairs, too, patients had evidently become exhausted. The sounds from the corridor became more pronounced, and I was afraid that my friends would come down. "What's all that noise?" asked Rasputin, lifting up his head. "Probably it's the guests going away," I replied. "I'll go up and see." As I entered the study, the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich, Perishkovich, and Sukhotin rushed towards me with revolvers in their hands. Questions showered on me. "Well, is it done? Is it all over?" "The poison has had no effect," I said. They gazed at me in mute astonishment. "Impossible," exclaimed the Grand Duke. "The dose was amply sufficient." "Did he take it all?" asked the others. "Every bit of it," I answered. We began to discuss what to do next and decided that we would go downstairs together, throw ourselves on Rasputin and strangle him. We were carefully making our way down the staircase when I suddenly realized that by doing this, we should ruin everything. The unexpected appearance of strangers would at once warn Rasputin of our intentions, and there was no telling how matters would end. It had to be remembered that we were not dealing with an ordinary type of man. I called my friends back into the study and told them of my apprehensions. With great difficulty, I persuaded them to leave me to finish with Rasputin alone. For a long time, they would not agree. They had qualms on my behalf. But finally, I took the Grand Duke's revolver and went down to the dining room. Rasputin was sitting at the table, just as I had left him. His head was sunken and he was breathing heavily. I went up quietly to him and sat beside him. He took no notice of my approach. A few minutes passed in silence, and then he slowly raised his head and looked at me. His eyes were dim with a dull, lifeless expression in them. "Are you feeling unwell?" I asked. "Yes, my head is heavy and my stomach is burning. Give me another glass, that will ease me." I poured him some Madeira. He drank it at a gulp and at once revived and regained his good spirits. I exchanged a few sentences with him and saw that he was perfectly conscious and that his mind was working normally. All of a sudden, he suggested that we should go to the gypsies. I refused on the ground that it was too late. "What does that matter? They're used to it. They sometimes wait up for me all night. I'm sometimes kept at Tsarskoye Selo on important business or just talking about God. But afterwards, I drive over to them in the car. The body also has to have a rest sometimes. Isn't that true? With God in thought, but with mankind in the flesh. That's the idea," said Rasputin with a significant wink. A conversation of this kind was the very last thing which I could have expected from him at that moment. Here I had been sitting all that time with a man who had swallowed an enormous dose of the most deadly poison. I had been watching every one of his movements in the expectation of a fatal issue, and now he is suggesting that we should go to the gypsies. But what amazed me most was that in spite of his instinctive knowledge and insight, he should now be so utterly unconscious of his approaching end. How could his sharp eyes fail to observe that, clenched in my hand behind my back, was a revolver which in an instant would be aimed at him? As this thought flashed through my mind, I looked round for some reason or other, and my glance fell on the crystal crucifix. I rose and went up to it. "What are you doing over there so long?" asked Rasputin. "I love this cross. It's a very beautiful thing," I answered. "Yes, it's a nice thing. Cost a lot of money, I'm sure. How much did you pay for it?" He came towards me, and without waiting for an answer, he continued, "But this is what takes my fancy most." And again he opened the labyrinth cupboard and began to examine it. "Grigory Efimovitch, you had better look at the crucifix and say a prayer before it." Rasputin looked at me in amazement and with a trace of fear. I saw a new and unfamiliar expression in his eyes, a touch of gentleness and submission. He came right up to me, looked at me full in the face, and he seemed to read in my glance something which he was not expecting. I realized that the supreme moment was at hand. "God, give me strength to end it all," I thought, and I slowly brought the revolver from behind my back. Rasputin was still standing motionless before me, his head turned to the right and his eyes on the crucifix. Where shall I shoot, I thought, through the temple or through the heart? A streak of lightning seemed to run through my body. I fired. There was a roar as from a wild beast, and Rasputin fell heavily backwards on the bearskin rug. I heard a noise on the staircase. My friends were hurrying to my aid. In their haste, they caught against the main switch just outside the room, and I suddenly found myself in darkness. Someone stumbled against me and called out in fright. I did not move. I was afraid of stepping onto the body in the dark. The light was switched on at last. They all rushed towards Rasputin. He was lying on his back. His face twitched now and then. His hands were convulsively clenched. His eyes were closed. There was a small red spot on his silk blouse. We bent over him and looked at him closely. Some of those present wanted to fire at him again, but were restrained by the fear of leaving unnecessary traces of blood. In a few minutes, Rasputin became quite still. We examined the wound. The bullet had passed through the region of the heart. There would be no doubt about it. He was dead. The Grand Duke, Dmitri Pavlovich, removed the body from the bare skin to the stone floor. We switched off the electric light, closed and locked the dining room door, and went upstairs to my study. We all felt elated, so convinced we were that the events of the night would deliver Russia from ruin and dishonor. Wonder how much is left on this chapter. It looks like a long chapter. Okay, I will stop there, and that'll be the end of part 4. So part 5 will start at chapter 14. And yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. And this will go live soon on the podcast. Thank you.